You may not know this, or you probably don't, but this man has changed your life more than Bill Gates, the iPhone, or banking has for everybody in the entire world put together. Households around the world would not know about Roswell if it wasn't for this man. What he has contributed to you knowing about the existence of these little guys piloting some ships coming from some other place and visiting Earth, hence being deemed extraterrestrial or non-terrestrial, is because of this man, the godfather of ufology. 58 years of study. 49, correct me, Stan? 49 is it of active lecturing, or is that 50 yet?
From 1967, so that's
50
49.
Years, almost 49, almost 50 years, which next year is going to be really cool. I'm going to get you in January all the way to December for that year. But nonetheless, everybody, he is back here tonight. I do not regret by not joining in on the show because this is truly an honor. You always get celebrities and politicians and rock stars here on the show. But again, none is more fun or more knowledgeable than this man right here. So I'm actually going to go back in history. So right around the time before you started studying this in 1958, you worked for a company in 1956 to 59. Tell us what you did for that company.
Well, I worked for the General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department. It was based in Evendale, Ohio, just outside Cincinnati. And we had a contract with, jointly sponsored by the Air Force and the Atomic Energy Commission then. The names have changed, but since then, to develop nuclear aircraft. And the big advantage is, hey, why would anybody want to do that? Well, you don't need to refuel. Unlimited range, you might say.
Exactly.
You got to replace the pilots from time to time. They get tired, whatever. But and so my specialty was radiation shielding, because one of the big problems with a nuclear-powered airplane is shielding is normally pretty heavy. If you got a reactor on board, you don't want to cook the crew or the people at where you land your aircraft or whatever. So shielding is important. It's got to operate at high temperatures, and it's got to be not too heavy. And so you get into exotic materials and things like that. And I was involved mostly with doing experiments in support of the projects department. They were designing systems. A nuclear airplane is very straightforward. The air comes in, goes to the compressor, as it does with a normal jet engine, goes from the compressor through the reactor and comes out at about 1,800 degrees or so, which is pretty darn hot for engines to work at. This is back then anyway. You'd be a little warmer today because we're better at making high-temperature materials. Anyway, and then it goes out through the turbine and you get thrust. And so, maybe you can run for a few thousand hours. And if people raise an eyebrow at that, let me point out that the Navy has nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that can operate for 18 years without refueling. And it makes a tremendous difference if you can fly and fly and fly, or sail on the ocean and sail and not have to get refueled. It makes a big difference. So that was an exciting program, and to give you an idea of the extent of it, in 1958 we spent $100 million. We employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. And that was at GE. Pratt Whitney had a somewhat smaller effort. Theirs was a little different system. They used a more compact reactor because it was liquid metal cooled instead of air. Air isn't a very good heat transfer agent. And but then you got to transfer the heat from the liquid metal to the air, and that's where it gets to be a bit tricky. Anyway, I don't know how much they spent that year, probably $50 million. So these were major efforts. I stress this because a lot of people seem to think that research gets done only in academia. For example, I had somebody tell me that if Roswell really happened, they'd have had to pull half the professors of physics out of their university slots, which is absolute nonsense. There's a whole world out there of national lab.
Speaking of that, they did with Howard Menzel, right?
Wait a minute.
You were just saying they would have had to pull half the professors out, but they obviously pulled Howard Menzel into the project, right?
Donald Menzel. No, he wasn't involved. He was teaching astronomy at Harvard and poo-pooing UFOs all along the way. And it was only because I ran across a memo which mentioned he had been in hearings which wanted to take away his security clearance, and my thought was, what security clearance? You don't need a security clearance to teach astronomy at Harvard or any place else for that matter, I suppose. And I had to get permission from 3 different people. I went to his files at Harvard. This has to do with the MJ-12 project, which was set up, and which I believe is where the important high-quality UFO stuff, as observed by military people and others, national security impact, in other words, I believe that all went to Majestic 12. But anyway, I was totally shocked because I didn't like Menzel when he was alive. And here I find out that, what do you know? He wrote a letter to Jack Kennedy. They knew each other pretty well. Kennedy was on the board of overseers at Harvard. And his area of interest, each member of the board picks an area of interest, was astronomy. And he worked with Menzel, and they even had breakfast together on occasion. But anyway, I found in his papers at Harvard, and they weren't scanned anywhere, so you had to go there, in other words. Got permission from 3 different people, and found out, he says to Jack, that there's one area where I may be able to help you. He had just been elected president after all, and that's with regard to the National Security Agency. And he had a longer continuous association with them, 30 years, of anybody in the country. When we are properly cleared to each other, I may be able to help you on this. And it turned out he did all kinds of classified work, which was unknown for many years. And so Menzel, I had one run-in with him at Harvard, and I was not impressed. Let's put it that way. I called to invite him to my lecture. I was speaking to an engineering alumni association, and I said, he was on the phone, and I said, my name is Stanton Friedman. I know all about you. And what? You read my congressional testimony next to yours? We were both contributors to the written document. No, you can't be a scientist and believe in flying saucers. And I left, which made him angry. And he started a rant. I said, Dr. Menzel, I didn't call to argue with you. I called out of courtesy. I'm speaking on your campus. I have no idea how much publicity they did to other than the members of their organization. Some organizations do, some don't. They open it up to the public. Others only for members only. Oh, well, of course I won't attend. So I told the story that night, so they'd know that I wasn't afraid to.
Interesting.
But I certainly had no inkling at that time that he had worked under high security for 30 years. He was a cryptologist, is the fancy word, and he did classified work for the FBI and CIA and other people like that. So he was one of these debunkers in disguise, so to speak.
Yes, he was in the program, literally in MJ-12, and then out there writing anti-UFO books.
Yeah. He. What I'm saying is nobody knew while he was alive that he was doing all kinds of classified work.
Literally a double agent. I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's right.
How can you have a conscience
people
like
gave
that?
Me. Well, people gave me a hard time about that. He couldn't have been. He was a debunker. Look, Burgess, Philby, and McLean, 3 names that shall go down in infamy, as somebody once said. They were British intelligence community operatives who were Russian spies. Well, you lead a double life to do that, don't you? You got to be very careful what you say so that nobody knows where the information came from, and what you tell your masters and all that sort of thing. So it's not the first time, in other words, that somebody has led a double life. but Menzel was particularly good at it. There was an article 7-8 years ago about his contributions to cryptology in a scientific journal. Somebody went through the same papers that I had seen and dug out some of his papers and stuff, and major contributions, but nobody knew about it in the unclassified world anyway. But you did say something a while back about nuclear rockets, and we had an active program on after 1960, let's say, and especially between 67 and 1970, to develop nuclear rocket engines. Now, these weren't just talked about or pretty pictures. Artists are great. They can create extraordinary systems. That doesn't mean you can build them or certainly not operate them. But there were actually, unbeknownst to most people, 3 separate programs to develop a nuclear rocket engine. And the way it worked was fairly straightforward. Building it wasn't, but you take liquid hydrogen when it's very cold, and you pump it through a nuclear reactor and out a nozzle, and in the reactor it gets heated to over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is extraordinarily hot for a reactor. The Navy reactor's under 1,200 degrees, and you kick it out the back end. Now, to give you an idea, all of these, there are 3 different organizations. I worked at Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab in Pittsburgh. We built the NRX A6, it's called. It doesn't matter, really. Los Alamos built the big one, 4,400 megawatts, the Phoebus 2B, Phoebus, the mythical creature,
Yes.
Phoebus was operated at a power level of 4,400 megawatts.
Oh, sorry.
And Aerojet General in Sacramento, Los Alamos was in Los Alamos. I mentioned people thinking that everything gets done in academia. Los Alamos employs over 6,000 people, and their budget's over $2 billion a year. And they built the big one, and then Aerojet General built a flight system that was close to a flight-like system, the XE-1, and it only operated at 1,000 megawatts. Now, I'll give you something to compare to. Hoover Dam produces 2,000 megawatts. These reactors were all well under 8 feet in diameter. And nice thing is, a normal rocket uses an oxidizer and a fuel, if you will, hydrogen and oxygen and stuff like that. But the nuclear-powered rockets, the coolant is only hydrogen, which has the lowest atomic weight of anything, is the most abundant substance in the universe, and so wherever you go, you're going to find hydrogen. And because it's low atomic weight, you get very high velocity out of it. So your velocity of the rocket relates to the velocity of the exhaust. Now, all these programs were successful. My happiest moment in industry was when the NRX A6 was operated out at the nuclear test site. That's in Nevada.
Nevada, yeah.
Not far from Area 51.
That's right. Yeah. John Lear always, said the test site, and sometimes he meant to say Area 51, but he would say the test site. So then I realized.
Well, it wasn't 51, but it was close.
Close, yeah, exactly. There's a big distinction between the Nevada test site and Area 51. Now,
yes.
Let me ask you this: I'm assuming that these programs of nuclear rockets, nuclear planes, was classified at the time, correct? So nobody knew they were flying around.
Well, no. Well, they weren't flying around.
Testing.
They were operated on the ground. Testing was going on. The data was classified. Okay. They were not black budget programs. That is, the sign at the door at GE said General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department. So its existence was not classified. Not many people knew about it, except those who worked there, of course. But and the same, I mean, Los Alamos, you got to have a clearance to work there, whether you're sweeping the floor or being a nuclear physicist, doesn't matter. Everybody who is based there has to have a security clearance. But and I'm not saying they don't do any black budget work. I'm sure they do. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure they do. They got some really fine scientists and engineers there. Anyway, all three of these programs operated, say, between 1968 and 1970. And the program was canceled. When it came time to shoot or cut bait, fish or cut bait, they
and this
cut
was
bait.
the era when, nuclear was the answer to everything, right? Literally, nuclear toasters and.
Yeah, the cars. I heard people talk about, we'll have nuclear-powered cars and stuff. But, it's funny. People have friendly attitudes toward things nuclear. For example, we sent a satellite out past Pluto last year.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a hell of a long way away, if you'll pardon the French. Yeah, the horizon. And I watched a lot of coverage of that, reading articles in the newspaper and watching on the tube, because it's exciting. It took nine years to get there, I guess, 9.5. And the interesting thing is, none of the coverage I saw mentioned that the source of energy for the Horizon spacecraft was a radioisotope, a thermoelectric generator with plutonium on board, mind you. And it provided the energy. I'm sure most people thought it was solar, although when you think about it, the further away you get from the sun, the lower the solar input, if you will. And Pluto is a heck of a long ways away from the sun. So nuclear, when you want a submarine, in World War II, you hear about submarines, U-boats, and what a threat they were to shipping and all that sort of stuff. They could stay underwater for maybe a day. They were diesel-powered, and you need air for the diesels. Nuclear-powered submarines, on the other hand, have literally gone around the world underwater without coming to the surface. And that means it's hard to know where they are if you're not in touch with the people on board, isn't it?
That's right.
And that's a very important part of the whole mutually assured destruction standoff between the Soviet Union and the United States. That is, if you're going to bomb me, I'm going to bomb you back, and you won't know where my bombing organization, that is a submarine with missiles on board, with nuclear weapons on the other end of the missiles. So if I can be assured you're going to beat the heck out of me if I try to beat the heck out of you, maybe it's not a good idea for me to attack you, So the nuclear-powered submarines that can stay underwater, as one Navy guy said to me, we take periscope leave. When we go by an island like Hawaii, we raise the periscope so we feel we're not forever stuck underwater. But so nuclear has been, let me give you a couple numbers that'll illustrate why. A big bomb in 1944 released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. It was a blockbuster. It took a big B-29 to carry it. In 1945, our first atomic bomb released the energy of 16,000 tons of TNT. And in 1952, the first fusion nuclear device, hydrogen bomb, if you will, released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. That's one bomb now. One stinking weapon, if you will.
Literally, I know, right? One.
And then the Russians, a few years later, exploded one that released the energy of 57 million tons of TNT.
Was that the hydrogen bomb that they exploded, or the whatever?
Yeah, H-bombs are all hydrogen bombs. Yeah. That's what the H stands for. Fusion devices, nuclear fusion. But the Russians, big one, we'd never exploded one that big.
That was the biggest one ever detonated, right, in history.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you think about it, so if you want a lot of energy, a little old chemical bomb ain't going to do it, man. You go to fission, 15, 20,000 tons of TNT in one bomb. You go to fusion, 10 million to 57 million tons of TNT. And, those are incredible numbers when you stop to think about them, but they illustrate something. You want a lot of energy in a small package, you go nuclear. I forget how did President Bush describe it? Nuclear?
Nuclear. Nuclear. I can never understand that. It's nuclear, not nuclear. And you're the president, for Christ's sakes. Learn the language.
Well, yeah, and incidentally, one of the things, I'll get political, but just because of my background and the work that I did, I worked on several other nuclear systems, but when I think of Donald Trump with his finger on the button, that scares the heck out of me, because you're controlling an awful lot of energy.
As long as you don't tweet about him.
No, you don't tweet.
You know what I mean? He gets a response to those tweets.
Non-tweetable. But the point is, the projects I worked on, I also worked at General Motors on a portable reactor, military compact reactor. You'd assemble it, fly it in someplace, set it up, and you could produce energy to make fuel for tanks or to do all kinds of things. MCR program. It got canceled. No surprise there. Where else did I work? Aerojet General Nucleonics, we did a study of fusion propulsion for deep space travel.
Oh.
And that was exciting. And Air Force spent $9 million on the study. And the thing is that we found that if you want to spend the dough, you can go. Nobody has decided to spend the dough. Money is the thing that gets into all of these programs. It's nice to have an idea, but putting it into practice, so nuclear systems have to work.
Yes.
If they don't, you got a mess. So reliability is an important part of that. And when you start getting to the very high temperatures, like I said, the Los Alamos, all three of those nuclear rocket systems, exhaust temperatures are over 4,000 degrees. Well, there isn't much that can handle that, And I was worried when we had our test, the Westinghouse system. They had asked me 2 weeks before we were going to have the test, "Hey, Stan, we're a little concerned about the heating in the control area of the reactor, control vanes they're called. Can you get some data for us?" And, yeah, we had a small a system there that we could operate that could be used to get data, and I made up some plans and talked to the people at the facility, and within a week we had data. But as we were running the test, they were broadcasting the conditions over the on-site PA system, not to the world, but to the people who work there and stuff. And I suddenly realized, if this thing doesn't work, they could blame me for this. If the control vanes melt, they got a bad problem here, folks. Even if it's out in the middle of nowhere in Nevada. So it was great pleasure that the systems, nobody knew how long they could operate for. Mm-hmm. And the longer you operate, the more radioactive the system becomes, so the more cooling it. And so 5 minutes, 10 minutes, conditions nominal, 20 minutes. Hey, this thing is looking good. Our goal was to operate for 60 minutes, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're for an upper stage of a rocket, if you make that the third stage, for example, and you want to go to Mars,
stage, it's great.
You could almost triple the power level, the thrust, if you use nuclear instead of chemical. So, an hour's operating time is a great many on this thing. So we got what we were supposed to get, and then they canceled the program. What can I say?
Sad, unless they took it to, of course, the underworld as into Black
World.
Yeah.
Well, I somehow I doubt it because I haven't seen any signs of it.
True.
It takes what really is needed here is somebody like Admiral Hyman Rickover. Mm-hmm. He ran the Navy nuclear program. He was Jewish. He couldn't join the country clubs back then, and so he decided to be a fine engineer. And some people hated his guts because he was a very demanding taskmaster.
Well, speaking of this, actually our webmaster and sound engineer and producer for the show happens to be in his heyday was on a nuclear submarine. So I'm going to bring on Tom to talk nukes with you.
Mr. Friedman,
well,
yes. I was a 19-year-old kid aboard a nuclear submarine back in the 1977 through 79. So everything you guys did, you paved the way for what became the Cold War nuclear submarine Navy. And so I lived around all that equipment. I wasn't a nuclear, I wasn't part of the nuke team. I was a mechanic, just a regular mechanic, but a non-nuclear mechanic. But I mean, that's what we lived with. And I mean, everything you're talking about, this was pre-Chernobyl. This was pre-nuclear hysteria about it that everybody has now. And the Navy, I think, ran the reactors the safest of anybody.
Yes. I agree with you. And it was a remarkable program.
But it was an innocent era. The era that you came through back in the 50s and 60s, it was all innocent physics. It was all practical physics. It was, we can do this, and it wasn't a lot of baggage associated with it. It was all, this is what we're going to do, and it was all mapped out. Whereas now, looking back, to try to do it now, I don't know if you could do it now.
Well, let me throw in one thing in the mix. Right
that's
now,
a problem, yeah.
I saw a recent documentary that was talking about nuclear power plants and basically looked at all the statistics and showed that nuclear power is by far the cleanest and safest power than anything we have out there.
All nuclear power is a fancy heater for generating steam.
Correct.
It's just a fancy heater. That's all it is.
There have been less meltdowns and problems with coal plants. And
no, the problem is what we're not doing is we're not. There's a lot of new technology that's out in magnetics and electricity that was forgotten, that Tesla came up with, that was just put by the wayside because nuclear was a viable alternative that came along, that seemed practical, that kind of allayed the fears of disasters that could happen with nuclear, and then the disasters came. So in the outset, back when you were developing all this, the disasters were purely hypothetical, and then the disasters came. And so now I don't think nuclear is as viable as a lot of people want it to be. I think with Fukushima and Chernobyl and some of the other issues that have come up, I just don't know that it's really a viable future. I really believe that there's other technologies.
What do you have to say, Stan?
I don't know what the other technologies are, but I will say this. Your point of view may be affected by things like we killed over 30,000 people in automobile accidents last year in the United States. I think we got to stop selling automobiles. And you say, well, but there's 200 million people using them, I guess. Risk versus benefit, So
yes, but while I understand your point, that's a perfect point. However, the problem with nuclear radiation, is that look at the half-life. You're looking at Chernobyl cannot be. How long? What's the damage there? 10,000 years? I mean,
no, probably not more than 1,000.
Okay, all right, point taken. But all right, so car accidents are one thing, but I think nuclear. That's the problem with nuclear is the toxicity is just too great. Whereas I would rather risk solar. Whenever we have a solar spill, it's a shiny day. It's a sunny day.
I agree with you that solar is less threatening to anybody, except if it doesn't work, of course, and when you need it, that can be a problem too. Or if you have a cloudy day instead of a bright day,
Well, what I found is that there's some research regarding some of the fuel cell technology, graphene, which is being used now to generate batteries that actually supplement the dark side of night. So that solar and graphene together, a lot of combination technologies, I think, not just a single technology, but I think it's a combination of technologies that going into the future are going to be, solar, wind, renewables, and some of these other magnetic technologies, I think that's going to be a lot more viable and a lot safer than nuclear. Don't you believe?
No, I think, look, there's 400 operating nuclear power plants around, and by and large they're doing a good job. And now with Fukushima, certainly it made a mess, but let's face it, much of that had to do with the tsunami. I'll never forget watching houses carried away on the ocean because of the tsunami, and that happened to their fuel supply too for the the backup systems and stuff. So the nuclear debate is going to go on for a long time, and certainly you should use it where it does the best job. That's why I say a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that can operate for 18 years without refueling gives the captain flexibility and that he never had when he had to wait for an oiler to come up. It's like you don't have to go to the gas station. I'm not saying that it's the answer to all man's problems, not at all. But it's one that shouldn't be neglected, and that has demonstrated, what was it? France was getting 50% of their power from nuclear. That's if you don't have oil.
I agree. I think if nuclear is run in a safe and sane manner, I mean, if you run nuclear to the same standards that the Navy runs it, no problem.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of civilian organizations, if they don't, then they're risking that. So I agree.
Well, you're right, and it's leadership. And look, I worked on space programs, and I was so disappointed with NASA. I was out when I worked for Westinghouse. I was out at Aerojet talking to their radiation shielding man, and he said, "Hey, Stan, you want to go to a meeting? What's going on?" Well, the Space Nuclear Propulsion Office is having a meeting about what we should do with the nuclear rocket engine. Fine. Okay, I went to the meeting, and they didn't have the faintest idea what they wanted to do with the nuclear rocket engine. Well, we could put a base on the moon. Well, maybe we should send somebody to Mars, Earth orbit to lunar orbit. A lot of things we could do. Look, if you don't know where you're trying to go, how can you provide leadership to get there? And they didn't know. That came. We all thought there'd be a base on the moon by 2000, certainly, and that we would have gone to Mars by now. But we didn't. We could have, but we didn't. So the lack of leadership was the thing that really bugged me. And in contrast with the Navy, and what you got to admit about Rickover, he knew where he wanted to go and how to get there.
Oh, his quality control was far none. Quality control with Rickover was everything. Everything. If you salted your food without tasting it, he would fire a nuclear officer from the program. There was things that he watched for in behavior of the nuclear officers. If they were not spot on with everything, you're done. And so
that's why he had such a good record.
That's right.
Absolutely.
You got to lay down the law when it comes to things like that. Well, listen, I hate to change topic because we have about 25 minutes left, but I'm going to skip 30 years of your life, Mr. Friedman. We'll revisit that era to go flash forward to 1978. When you literally helped, pave the way to put Roswell in the minds of everybody who are alive today. Children who are born hear about Roswell before they hear the name Neil Armstrong, or about the solar system, or anything for that matter.
Well, yeah, I got lucky about Roswell. Persistence pays off, but originally it was lucky.
I don't think it was luck. I think it was you being persistent.
Well, look, let's face it. I was totally surprised. I was doing 3 interviews at a television station, not the places you expect high intellectual activity, I guess I could say. I'm not insulting anybody on the air, you understand.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to do 3 interviews at the television station, did the first 2 to promote my lecture at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, where all the floods are now, that Baton Rouge. And the 3rd reporter was nowhere to be found. station manager he's looking at his watch. He knows I have other things to do. He knew the people who brought me to the station from the campus. And out of the blue, he says, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And brilliant investigator that I am, I said, why? What's special about him? I don't know. From nothing. He says, he handled wreckage of one of those saucers you were interested in when he was in the military. What? That was totally out of left field. And he was being serious. There wasn't nobody around. There was no laughter. This was not a joke. I said, well, what do you know about him? Well, he lives over in Houma. I didn't know where Houma, Louisiana was. I've been there since to talk to Jesse, as a matter of fact. He's a great guy. We're old ham radio buddies. You really ought to talk to him. Then the reporter showed up. So I did the third interview, had a great day out at the university. That night we had a great crowd. And the next morning from the airport, I was there early. I was going off to give another lecture someplace else. But I had some time, so I called information. You remember, used to find people that way.
That's right.
In Houma, Louisiana.
Yeah, used to call and ask the operator. There'd be a human on the other end.
Yeah, real person. You give them a name, and they'll tell you. So I did that at Jesse Marcel, and she had a listing for me, and I called him. And I explained to him that I'd been talking to Bill Allen, the guy at the station, and that I was very interested in UFOs. And Bill had told me that he had handled wreckage of one. So he told me his story. He was the intelligence officer for the 509th. And the debunkers always leave this out. It just happened to be the most elite military group in the world.
That's right.
They're the guys
only nuclear company or squadron in the entire world for that matter.
Yeah, they had nuclear weapons. They had dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 2 more in Operation, whatever it was. I forget the name of it. There was another operation 2 years after Hiroshima, 3 years really, and so. They all had high-level security clearances. Base security was very important. And I had one guy say, there was an unknown PR guy put out a story that was unauthorized. That's baloney. Plain and simple baloney. The PR guy was Walter Haut, and I've spent time in his home. We've had meals together. I was the first guy to find him. I got lucky. I called the local newspaper about Roswell. Mike, to talk to the editor from 1947. He's long gone. What do you need? I said, well, I've got these newspaper articles here. My colleague Bill Moore had located a number of articles following up on the Jesse Marcel thing. And it says the base public information officer, a guy named Walter Haut. Yeah. His name is spelled 4 different ways. And she says, his wife works here. What?
What are the odds of that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking in 1977, 78, that time frame, and this has happened in 47. And so I talked to the wife, and then later I talked to Walter, and I met him many times in Roswell. He was one of the founders of the museum and so forth. And, the debunkers won't tell you that, he was also a World War II bombardier.
Yeah.
And he was chosen to drop the instrument package. Operation Crossroads was the name I was trying to think of before. The testing done after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Walter was chosen to drop the instrument package, which means he was one of the best. He was a combination navigator and bombardier. You pick your best guy, because without the instrument package, you've wasted the nuclear weapon. We didn't have any to waste at that time. We've done quite a few more now.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're not using them, you notice. So
that's right.
Yeah, we're not using them. So that I talked to Walter. He helped me, and I got from him a copy of the base directory from 47. Mm-hmm. He knew Jesse Marcel. had good things to say about it.
Let me ask you this, because this is something to me interesting now that we're on talking about Walter Haut for a second. About his memos, that he signed the affidavits, one before he died, and then the other one that was scheduled to be released 5 years after his death, which was drastically different. That was in Tom Carey and Don Schmidt's book, Witness to Roswell.
Yeah, and Walter had... He never went public while he was alive with having seen wreckage and bodies and stuff like that. But he left behind him these statements. And they're quite significant. And as I say, we're not talking about, as the debunkers said, a guy unnamed, an anonymous guy, putting out an unauthorized press release. The press release was instructed to put it out by the colonel who was in charge of the base. And that colonel went on to be a 4-star general and vice chief of staff of the Air Force, Butch Blanchard. His name wasn't Butch, but they called him that. He was a big guy, 6'4". And Blanchard obviously was well thought of, because all 4 promotions from colonel to 4-star general had to be approved by Congress. And so I heard one guy say, he was a loose cannon. Sure, when he was on his way up, he was in charge of thousands of nuclear weapons for the Strategic Air Command. We're not talking a loose cannon. We're talking about a very well-trusted, very professional guy. And if there had been a third pilot to drop another bomb on Japan, it would have been Butch. He was in line. So that got me into Roswell. In the next couple of years, Bill Moore and I found, what did we find? 62 people. In another 10 years or 5 years, and it was 90 people connected with the case. But, I worked hard at it. And one of the important people I found, it shows up in a picture of General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force, who was Blanchard's boss at the time. There's a famous picture of him with Colonel Thomas Jefferson Dubose in Ramey's office. And, the story went out from Roswell by Haut saying we recovered the wreckage of a crash flying saucer. And then that got it started. And then the next day, General Ramey, who's pictured in this picture I was talking about, said, no, it was just a radar reflector weather balloon combination. And Colonel Dubose is in the picture. Well, I decided that, I wonder if he's alive. I knew Blanchard was dead, and a whole bunch of other people were dead. But with a name like Dubose, if I'm looking for somebody, I like it to be not John Smith, because there's an awful lot of John Smith. There aren't a lot of Thomas Jefferson Duboses around. So I called the West Point Alumni Association, thinking that many of the officers that were still around in 47 were guys who'd gone to West Point, because everybody else got out. The war was over in 45, and West Point said, he went. They gave me his class, 26 or 27, I forget which, and yes, he's still alive in Florida. They didn't tell me where in Florida, but with a name like that, he wasn't hard to find. And so I managed to locate him, and my folks were retired in Miami Beach, but on the way down, he lived closer to Orlando. And I called him, arranged to see him. And he told me in person that he took a call from Ramey's boss, General McMullen, giving him 3 instructions. Get the press off our back. This is after the press release went out. Get the press off our back. I don't care how you do it. Send some of that wreckage up here today with one of your Colonel Couriers. This is to Ramey, who's at Fort Worth, Texas. and I don't want you ever to talk about it again. That's an order. Do I need to put it in writing, Colonel? No, sir. When a two-star general, also a West Pointer, tells a colonel what to do, he does it.
That's right.
People are a little surprised at that, but
in post-World War II patriotic country.
Well, that's right. I mean, the chain of command was very clear and unambiguous, and they knew each other, so there was no question about that. So Dubose told me that in person. And, I checked. I got a copy of the yearbook. I know he was in there, and I know he's in the pictures. And I checked. I forget how many. He had a lot of hours as a pilot. Set up the Air Force's search and rescue group and so forth later on. So that's the kind of guy you need to find and talk to. And I try to get people. I'll be talking at the MUFON conference next week.
Yeah, the symposium, annual symposium for everybody who's out there listening who should buy their tickets now.
Yeah, go to MUFON.com and it'll tell you how to do that. And I will be, I'm getting 10 minutes of Kathleen Marden's time. She's one of the speakers, expert on a lot of things, one of them being UFO abduction. She's Betty Hill's niece. Betty and Barney Hill's niece, and so we've written a book together, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. But anyway, I'm getting 10 minutes of her time to talk about sort of rules for ufology after 58 years of interest and that's a way of putting in a promo, but people should know there are proceedings for the conference, and that'll have Kathy's paper in it. I'm a last minute addition to the program, but I'm going to be there signing copies of our new book. Kathy and I have a new book out called Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. And we identify an awful lot of fiction that's been brooded about by the noisy negativists, or should I say nasty, noisy negativists. That's more appropriate, I guess. We do have some questions. Why some people, you mentioned Donald Menzel earlier, we at least know that he had a high-level security clearance and was doing classified work that nobody knew anything about. But Dr. Edward U. Condon with the University of Colorado study, why was he so negative?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let's talk about that for a moment, because a lot of people don't even consider that. They just say, look at the findings of the Condon report. Oh, it's over.
Well, some people took that, although I know a few people who got interested because they read the Condon report.
Yeah.
Condon was admitted to the National Academy of Sciences in the late 40s. He became the president of the American Physical Society, we all physicists all belong to. Was also president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. A remarkable, good, solid background in science. And yet he was so negative about UFOs in his report. And he didn't personally investigate any of the cases. And he also made a statement that's in the report. It's a big fat report, 865 pages or something, and he said there'll be no aliens, no extraterrestrials visiting Earth for 10,000 years, which is one of those stupid comments. How do you establish that? That's as bad as the professor of astronomy who, in 1903 October, said if there was one thing he was sure of, it's that man would never fly in a vehicle, maybe a balloon, but not in a vehicle. That was 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. But to say 10,000 years before anybody can visit us, you put up the dough, I'll tell you how to go, as I said before. So Condon is a bit of a puzzle, and so was, Menzel. I solved some of the puzzle, but one of the other people we talk about who put out a lot of fiction was Philip Glass. He was a senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology, sort of the media go-to guy because he worked in Washington. He was a fast writer, that's for sure. And he said a lot of dumb things about flying saucers. One of them cost him some money. I mentioned MJ12 earlier, and he challenged me on the fact that one of the memos that I think is legitimate was done in a large pica type. And he said, but the National Security Council, which is mentioned in passing in the memo, that they used only elite type, and he had 10 samples to prove it. And he challenged me to find any other documents and with a whole bunch of qualifications done in the same size and style type, and he would pay me $100 each for up to a maximum of 10. To make a long story short, and there's a picture of his check to me in my book, which he got very angry about. He had never been, I found out from the Eisenhower Library, he had never been there. And
he was just another one of those
weeks there.
making proclamations without evidence.
That's right, exactly. And he not only had never been there, but they have 250,000 pages of National Security Council materials. Ike used the NSC a great deal. And to suggest on the basis that you've got 10 here that are done in elite type, well, they must all have been. Well, to extrapolate from 10 to 250,000 is typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology, as I like to say. And so whether Klass was working for somebody, as has been suggested, he made a good source. He traveled. He got married when he was over 60. He traveled in Europe. He was in a great position to attend technical meetings in which there were Russian speakers, and to deal with, who's saying stuff out of turn, that the Americans going to a conference, and what are the Russians saying at the conference, and stuff like that. He was in a great position to do all that, and he was certainly a fast writer. But he had a thing about UFOs. He said, every sighting has a prosaic explanation. Now, the biggest Air Force study, Blue Book Special Report 14, they looked at 3,201 cases, scientists did. They published a report, the Blue Book Special Report 14, and in it they found that 21.5% of the 3,201 cases could not be explained, completely separate from those listed as insufficient information. They found the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. And there's a whole bunch of other data which I've written about. They can go to my website, www.stantonfriedman.com. They can find all this stuff. You can get copies of Blue Book Special Report 14 and some of my details about Klass and stuff. But these guys had a tremendous, Menzel, Condon, and Klass, had a tremendous influence on the press and on the general attitude about UFOs, because they were perfectly willing to say things that simply weren't true.
Correct.
Which I object to.
One thing
I
that
thought science was supposed to get at the truth.
Exactly. And one thing that really bothered me about Condon is that remark he made early on in the study where he said something to the effect that he knows his answer or he knows what the conclusion's going to be, but he's not supposed to say it till the study is done.
That was at Corning, New York, in a public lecture, and that is one of those things that it's just hard to understand, that a man with his background, and he had a good background, I would never deny that. He demonstrated competence. But, now I'll admit that UFOs are a little bit different from many things. Remember, the right question is not, are all UFOs alien spacecraft? The question is, are any? Any. Good hitters don't have to get a hit 100% of the time. If they get a hit 30% of the time, they make a lot of money. 300 hitters, a good hitter.
So many answers will be answered, or so many answers will come to fruition if just one. That's all we need is one, the number one. As simple as that.
Nobody's offering me a trip on one, unfortunately, and I've never even seen one. But
No. I want a trip on one too. One day, hopefully, we'll both take trips or be invited for an intergalactic tour, or at least intragalactic and interstellar.
Interstellar.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things that's happened, sometimes the things do happen well, has been the Kepler spacecraft, the satellite that's going out there, and it's in orbit, and it's looking for planets around stars. And much to a lot of people's surprise, it's finding them.
Goldilocks planets at that.
Say that again?
Goldilocks planets at that. That's the
well, okay, yes.
Yeah.
The point is that there were times when there were people saying that ours is the only solar system.
That's when I grew up. That's what I was told in school, in all elementary and high school. That's what I was told.
Well, as it happens, the Kepler has found, the most recent time I checked, there are estimates between 1 and 1.6 planets per star. Think about that for a minute. And to give you some numbers, within 100 light years of here, that's just down the street, the galaxy is 100,000 light years across. Next big galaxy over is 2 million light years away. So, with 100,000, 10,000 stars within 100 light years, that implies that there are 10,000 planets. Now, I'm not saying they all have life. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Or up to more than that. If it's 1.6, it could be up to.
Well, that's right.
16,000.
And not only are there lots of planets, but sometimes the stars and the planets are much closer to other stars and planets than we are. We're out in the boonies. The next star over from the sun is 4.3 light years away. That's down the street. But if you look at the Betty Hill star map, the two base stars, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli, which means the net in Latin, those two stars are only an eighth of a light year apart. In other words, they're over 30 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over. We're out in the boonies. These guys got next door neighbors. So it's my assumption that if you got a nearby star, the development of interstellar travel will happen a lot sooner than when you're a long ways away from any neighbor. Doesn't that make sense? I mean,
yes. Agreed. And you know what? I think it's a matter of time it's going to happen. So much has changed. It's such a dynamic field to be in, and we're at the right time.
Well, you realize that the big problem is we'd have to admit we're not the big shots we'd like to think we are.
Correct.
Nobody wants to do that.
But it's going to happen at some point. And let me go to one point before we run out of time. Going back to Project Blue Book, even the person the Air Force brought in from the outside, which was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, to debunk everything, ended up after, 20, how many years?
20 years, yeah.
20 years saying, wait a minute, there is something to this. And he became a full-on believer and wrote a few books and even appeared in a movie, Close Encounters.
Close Encounters, yeah. It had a cameo appearance.
Exactly,
yeah. Yeah, Alan came around, although I never could get him to look at information about interstellar travel. He just was unwilling to dig into that part of things. I mean, that's in that non-academic world, of course, interstellar travel. But Alan certainly set up the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, or in Chicago, if you can say. And they're still going on. And he became a spokesman for saying there's something worth looking at here. He's not the only scientist. The congressional hearings of way back in 1968.
Yes, the only ones that are real in the Congress, unlike the citizen hearing, which was a mock congressional hearing.
Yeah, I was at both.
That's right.
I wasn't. Right. I provided testimony to the first one and was present in person at the second one. Yeah, mock hearings. That's a good way to put them. But
Yeah.
that's M-O-C-K, not M-A-C-H, for those who worry about
yes.
the details. But, yeah, there's a great deal of information out there. And anybody who is going to express an opinion should be forced to justify the opinion with facts and data. And I know I've given over 700 lectures in all 50 states, 10 provinces, and 18 other countries. Number 19 coming up in November. I'll be in Bulgaria. Honest. They're having a conference where I will be speaking. And I've had a chance to see where people stand. When I talk about 5 large-scale scientific studies, they show data, PowerPoints, and then I ask, how many people here have read this? And I'm lucky if 2% have read any of the 5 large-scale scientific studies about which I talk. At the end of my lecture, I say, I get the first question. How many people here believe they have seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer? I've defined my terms early on. And just raise your hand. I'm not asking for names. You don't need a... And so I asked that question. And the hands, each person seems to be surprised that so many other people have seen one. Typically, it's 10% of the audience. And then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. And the problem is that most people believe most other people don't believe in UFOs. So the fear of ridicule is the major reason for not reporting. And I've checked that out. In front of 1,300 people at East Texas State University, I asked my questions. How many have seen one? And then how many of you reported what you saw? And then I'll ask, how many of you were in the military at the time? If there's still anybody, I'll say, you want to tell us about it? And the guy in front of 1,300 people says, I can't. They told me not to say anything, which was a great line. I had another guy in Indiana, that was in Texas, he said, they took my pictures. That's all he said. So I prodded him a little bit. I'm sure the audience would like to hear the rest of the story. And he agreed to tell it. He remained seated. I didn't ask his name. He was flying a 4-engine Air Force plane across the Pacific, and plane 20 miles ahead radios back, saucer heading your way. They had gun cameras. They took pictures. They radioed the base they were going to and explained that they had film to be handled as appropriate classified material. And when they landed, the film was taken, and pilots don't go to the drugstore with their footage, incidentally. And they were debriefed and told never to say anything. And I think 99+% of the people in that audience certainly believed the guy. So, and I did a little experiment in a class where, with the help of a professor. I said, look, can we have the students, vote with their eyes closed?
Yes.
And you count the votes, not me. You count the votes, so there's no bias here. And don't tell anybody what the count is until after we clear this up. So the first question was, how do you think most people don't believe in flying saucers? 80% of the kids. And then the question was, again with eyes closed and without knowing what the vote was, how many of you do believe in flying saucers? 80%.
Oh, total reversal. Oh.
Well, yeah, and so people think you must get a hard time from audience because you come on so strong, because I say some UFOs are alien spacecraft, we're dealing with a cosmic Watergate, no good arguments against this, and I come on very strong. And people say, oh, you must get a hard time. I say, I don't. I've had 11 hecklers, 2 of them were drunk, in well over 700 lectures. So you get that many if you talk about sports, religion.
800 almost at this point. You got to be getting close to 800, I would think.
Yes, we do. I am getting probably over 800 altogether, but I'm thinking of colleges, so maybe it's more like 750 or something. But what I'm saying is that many more people believe in flying saucers than you might think, but they're fearful of ridicule. I mean, they come to my table, they buy a book, I autograph it for them, and I got to tell you about my sighting, the guy says, and I say, I listen, did you report it? No. Why not? They'd think I was some kind of a nut. That's the normal response.
And I've seen this time and time again in person when I was talking to you and someone would come up and want to say, oh, Stan, or Mr. Friedman, can I tell you my story? I mean, time and time and time again at these events that I've seen you at over the last several years. And it's true. I think that's a very good point to make across. A lot of people out there believe in this topic, but are fearful for telling the truth because of ridicule. That's a simple fact, and it is something that people can't get over. With that being said, we know we've surpassed our time, but we do have a live caller. 717, welcome to the show. What do you have for Mr. Friedman, your end?
Good evening, Dr. J. My name is Lou Sheehan from Rancho Cucamonga, and I always really enjoy hearing Stan Friedman talk. Mr. Friedman, I have about 125 questions, so I appreciate your patience.
Let's try one. My email address is at my website.
I know of you well. But Chase Brandon, I'll use the word testimony, whatever. He's probably not under oath, but obviously. But what are your thoughts? Have you followed up with him? Do you have any?
Well, I haven't talked to him, but I did talk.
Okay.
I did talk to Lee Spiegel, who did talk to him and interviewed him. Lee is a fine reporter for Huffington Post.
He comes on this show regularly. He's a great guy. I vouch.
Yeah, and he's the one who arranged the congressional hearings. I mean, the testimony at the United Nations, not the Congress. Anyway, Lee talked to Brandon Chase Brandon, rather.
Brandon.
So the reason, when I first heard the name, I thought somebody's pulling our leg here, because the producer of the film UFOs Are Real, which I was a technical advisor on, and I was in, and we travel around the country talking to people. Still available. It's on my website.
That was the first documentary I saw.
Well, good. I hope good. It must have been.
Good.
Yeah. And the producer was named Brandon Chase, and then I hear about this guy named Chase Brandon. I thought, something's fishy here, you know. But I talked to Lee, and he met with them and so forth. He worked for the CIA, and he said that when he was in the classified files, he saw a folder or something on Roswell.
A box, supposedly. A box.
Okay, a box. And so in talking to Lee, I trust Lee. I've known him for a long time, in the mid-'70s, and he was quite favorably impressed with him. So I see no reason not to be. He had nothing to gain, actually, by going public. He hadn't written a book, that he was pushing or stuff like that.
Actually, he had written a book, Stan. He had written a book, but I'm not criticizing him. I'm just hoping you have some.
No, you may be right.
What do you think?
You may be right. Is it any good?
It's a novel, and people read it to try
okay.
to. Okay.
Yeah,
try to figure out clues that he may be dropping hints. There's a lot of underground facilities in the novel, and that's one thing people pick up on and ask if whether or not he's trying to say that the U.S. has a lot of underground facilities of which we're unaware. That's one of them.
I would think so. From the moment we've had satellites overhead, where else would you go?
Well, yeah, and also if the other guy has nuclear weapons he can drop on you, you're much safer underground.
That's right. What do you, unless you have a spaceship, to get off this planet, but then what are you going to live off of and where,
Well, sadly, you can also hide.
Send me food. We need food for the next 10 years while we're in space.
Exactly. While we're orbiting the planet that's just been nuked.
Yeah. You can also hide things from the citizenry, I guess, including UFOs. I think that's what.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, like I said, I hope you get in touch with him someday. Discover yet more information.
I've thought about it, and as I say, if I hadn't talked to Lee, I'd be much less positive about it. But he talked to him, and the strange coincidence: Brandon Chase and Chase Brandon.
Right.
A surprise. Did somebody pick up on that, and see his name in the movie or something like that? I don't know. Yeah. But I'm satisfied from my dealings with Lee that
Okay.
he was real and detailed and trustworthy. That's the way I'd put it, I guess.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lou. Stan, unfortunately, we're out of time. If I could ask you if you could please hang over till after the show. You're going to hear some quiet time while the people are hearing the outro music. But before I start giving my thanks to everybody and, of course, our affiliated networks and sponsors, let's get a final statement from you, not to mention your promotion. And let me just say this before you do that. For everybody out there, you can already get Stan's books just by going to our website, drjradiolive.com, and clicking on the books and videos link and find Stan Friedman. It'll take you to his author's page. But if you buy them directly from him on his webpage, you're going to get them autographed. Keep that in mind.
That's right.
So,
personally autographed.
Yes.
Yeah, the web that you can get the books from what's that little company, Amazon, something like that.
I know, little, right? It'll be the largest retailer ever in by 2020 is what the projections show.
Are they that close already? Okay.
Can you believe that? I'm blown away by that. Yeah.
Yeah, the world has changed. Buy online. That's the way to go.
Oh, they deliver food with drones and everything now. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's remarkable, I'd say, rather than crazy.
A couple weeks ago, I did a test when they opened this Amazon Prime store where they deliver within 24 hours. So I purchased something at 7:30 in the morning on a Sunday, and the time frames I chose was 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Guess what time it arrived at my door?
No idea.
8:03 a.m. 33 minutes after I ordered the item. Amazon delivery truck, their own delivery, shows up at my door, and there's my item. And it was just a test to see, what is this new system? And I was blown away.
Wow.
Yeah, because
I'm blown away by that.
Yeah.
But anyway, if people want to reach me, my email is at my website, www.stantonfriedman.com. And you can use PayPal, which I have only good things to say about PayPal. It's been a pleasure having them handle payments and stuff. They know what they're doing, is all I can say.
They also offer credit now.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it works, and you can I do autograph everything that I send out. And we have bargains and deals, just to make it attractive. And they can come to my lectures. They're listed on the website, too, events coming up and stuff like that. So I'm accessible. I don't give out my phone number on the air because then people call and all kinds of...
Yeah, agreed.
But I answer the phone. I don't have a secretary. I don't have a staff. It's a one-man operation. But what the heck? What else has a guy my age got to do?
Enjoy life. And this is truly an enjoyment because you're helping the world get to the bottom of the truth. And you have changed so many lives, including mine. I would not be here if it wasn't for you. So...
I think I'm pleased about that.
I would hope so because you are literally a living icon. Everyone says you are literally the golden man. Just not too recently, I was on the phone, Linda Moulton Howe, and your name came up, and she said Stan is as golden as anyone can be, and it is a pleasure to have someone like him in this field. And this is heard from everybody time and time again. So I gotta say, it's true.
Thank you very much. Flattery will get you everywhere, as I said. But
internationally too. Internationally.
Well, I'm looking forward to my 19th country to speak in, and I'll also be in San Marino, which I've been to before, but I like that. Kind of I think it's the world's smallest republic or something like that, in the middle of Italy, but. I've lectured there before, and it was fun. So I hope the listeners will realize that this is a serious subject, and we can joke a lot and all that sort of stuff, but man's place in the universe is not a trivial question.
No.
And it seems clear that we're not the big shots we'd like to think of us as being. And, what are we doing here? Well, maybe this is a penal colony. They dumped all the bad boys and girls here, and that's why we're so nasty to each other. I have a bunch of other solutions in my book, Flying Saucers and Science, but, the why questions, because that's what people really want to know. But it's been fun to be on, so we'll do it again.
That's right. Absolutely. We sure will, because I will never, ever get enough of speaking to you, nor the listeners hearing about you. So I must thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us yet again. I would have kept you for a little bit longer, but I do know you have to pack for the MUFON Symposium. Make sure everybody...
and it's late here, remember.
That's right. It's, 12:20 almost a.m.
That's right.
Atlantic time. So I must thank you. Obviously, the networks that syndicate us. We have Late Night in the Midlands. I want to thank Michael Varr and Ira Robinson. Also, Angel Espino from PSN Radio, and all the way in the United Kingdom, set up by my co-host Johnny Webb, a deep program radio network run by JC, not to mention the 27 terrestrial stations where you can hear the show, and our very own Coast to Coast PM radio network, not to be confused with the show Coast to Coast AM. We are a far bigger reach, bigger audience, and of course more guest selection on this show. So must thank everybody for that. Don't forget all the promotions that are going on, like the Watchers Bundle, the Zox Pro. It's all there discounted for you guys, and not to mention, like I said, the bookstore and the new chat room. Yes, we are monitoring all the social media. Remember, everything is under the same name, Dr. J Radio Live. The name of the show, the name of Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Google+, YouTube, where we archive our shows, Pinterest, Slack, and things I don't even know. But just remember, it's just one thing, DRJ Radio Live. And then, of course, I want to thank my crew, especially Johnny Webb, who stayed up so late, and then everybody else. I'm running out of time. You know who you are. Thank you all for being on this side and on behind the scenes and on the scenes, helping on the show. And for the most important people I want to thank are you, the listeners. Remember, disclosure is in your hands, everyone. Take this information and do something with it. Don't just be passive. With that being said, this is Dr. J, and we are officially signing off.